The grand obsidian chamber of the High Synod was not silent. It was suffocating. The air, recycled through millennia-old filtration systems that tasted of ozone and ancient dust, hung heavy with the scent of ozone and the pheromones of a dozen species, all radiating distinct variations of terror. Light, filtered through the crystalline dome far above, cast long, distorted shadows across the amphitheater, turning the delegates into looming specters of their respective civilizations. Xylas, High Counselor of the Ethelgard and custodian of the Galactic Concordat, rested his manipulators upon the cool, dark stone of his podium, his compound eyes twitching as he surveyed the assembly. They were the masters of the known stars, the architects of the Pax Galactica, yet here they sat, reduced to squabbling children in the face of an enigma that refused to adhere to the established laws of political physics. The holographic projection in the center of the room, a swirling sphere of data and star charts, dominated the space, casting a pale blue glow on the chitinous armor of the Crawl Warmasters and the flowing, silken robes of the Sylphian scholars. The subject of their dread was pulsating in the center of the map, a rapidly expanding zone of crimson that had swallowed 3 systems in less than a single standard rotation of the galactic core. There were no declarations of war, no diplomatic envoys seeking trade routes, no transmissions demanding surrender. There was only movement, inexorable, impossible movement. "They do not ask," the Crawl representative, Warlord Vorak, growled, his voice a grinding tectonic shift that vibrated through the floor plates. He stood, a mountain of scarred carapace and bio-augmented muscle, pointing a jagged claw at the hologram. "We sent a frigate to the edge of the Cygnus Drift to hail them. We demanded identification. We demanded they respect the borders drawn by the progenitors. And what was the response? Silence. Absolute, insulting silence. Their vessels simply moved past ours as if we were dust motes in the void. They deployed monumental structures, machines the size of moons, and began to harvest. They stripped the gas giant of Cygnus IV in 3 cycles. 3. It took my people a century to build the Dyson rings around our home star, and these Terrans dismantled a planet before we could even arm our weapons batteries." Vorak slammed his fist onto his console, fracturing the display. "The title of the report is accurate, Counselor Xylas. It is not a negotiation. Humans take what they want, and right now they want the hyperlanes." A ripple of murmurs went through the chamber, a cacophony of clicks, hums, and whispers. The fear was palpable. For 10,000 years, the Concordat had maintained balance through bureaucracy, trade, and the occasional ritualized skirmish. Every species knew their place. Every resource was allocated by the grand algorithm. But humanity had emerged from the uncharted dark zones of the Orion Arm not as supplicants, but as a force of nature. They had bypassed the uplift protocols, ignored the trade guilds, and disregarded the territorial buoys that marked the boundaries of civilized space. They were an aberration. A species that did not seem to care about the intricate web of alliances that held the galaxy together. Xylas raised a hand, demanding silence, though his own hearts beat with a rhythm of profound unease. He was old, even for an Ethelgard, and he had seen civilizations rise and fall, but this was different. This felt like the onset of a storm that would wash away the very foundations of their reality. "Peace, Warlord," Xylas said, his voice amplified by the acoustic architecture of the spire sounding calm despite the tremor in his soul. "We are not here to succumb to panic. We are here to analyze, to understand. You speak of them as conquerors, yet there have been no casualties. They stripped Cygnus IV, yes, but the system was uninhabited. They moved through the blockade, but they did not fire upon your ships. This is not the behavior of a warlord. It is the behavior of an engineer who does not notice the insects beneath his boots." He turned his gaze to the Sylphian delegation, ethereal beings of light and sound suspended in anti-gravity fields. "Scholar Alara, your caste has been monitoring their transmissions. Surely, amidst the noise of their industry, there is a pattern, a language, a justification." Alara floated forward, her bioluminescence dimming to a somber gray. "We have listened, High Counselor," she chimed, her voice a harmonious chord that resonated in the minds of all present. "We have directed the great listening arrays of the nebular sanctuary toward their fleets. We expected battle chants or trade codes or religious axioms. We found none of that. Their internal communications are encrypted with complexities that defy our quantum decryptors, but the leakage, the background chatter, is open. It is terrifying in its banality. They speak of tensile strength, of gravitational shear, of timelines and efficiency. They do not speak of glory. They do not speak of us at all. It is as if they are working on a schedule that only they can see, and we are merely environmental hazards to be navigated." She paused, the light around her flickering. "However, there is one phrase that repeats, a directive. It translates roughly to, "The anchor must hold. We do not know what the anchor is." They are willing to tear apart star systems to ensure it does. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The anchor must hold. It sounded religious, yet the humans operated with a cold, secular efficiency that bordered on the mechanical. Xylas looked back at the map. The crimson stain was moving toward the Antares Rift, a volatile region of space known for its gravitational anomalies and the graveyard of ships that had ventured too close. It was a worthless sector, dangerous and unstable. Why would they go there? Why would they expend such colossal energy to seize a region that the Concordat had abandoned eons ago? The logic did not fit the profile of a conqueror. Conquerors sought garden worlds, resource-rich asteroid belts, and population centers to enslave. Humans were taking the broken places, the dangerous places, and they were doing so with a speed that suggested desperation. "They are moving toward the rift," Xylas murmured, more to himself than the council. "If they breach the perimeter of the Antares sector, they will violate the Treaty of Dust. That region is quarantined for a reason. The subspace instability there is a threat to the entire quadrant." He looked up, his decision solidifying. "We cannot allow them to trigger a collapse. Warlord Vorak, you wish to fight? Then we shall give you the opportunity to defend the stability of the galaxy, but this will not be a strike mission. This will be a blockade. We must stop them before they enter the rift. Assemble the Grand Fleet, every vessel capable of warp travel. We will meet them at the precipice. We will demand they answer for their theft of resources and their violation of our sovereignty. And if they simply try to take the rift as they have taken the outer systems, we will show them that the Concordat is not an insect to be ignored." The preparations for the interception were unlike anything the galaxy had seen since the Great Scourge. The mobilization was absolute. Shipyards that had lain dormant for centuries roared to life, churning out munitions and shield generators. The skies above 100 worlds filled with the contrails of ascending warships. Yet underneath the martial pride, there was an undercurrent of dread. The reports from the Rim were getting stranger. Scouts spoke of human ships that were not merely metal and ceramic, but constructs of woven energy and matter, hulls that shifted and adapted to the stresses of the void. They spoke of engines that didn't just push the ship, but pulled space itself around the vessel. The humans were not just advanced. They were operating on a paradigm of physics that the Concordat had theorized but never achieved. And still, the accusation held: humans take what they want. They had taken the silence of the void and filled it with the roar of their industry, asking permission of no one. The journey to the Antares Rift was a somber procession of light and steel. The Grand Fleet, a conglomerate of a dozen species navies, stretched across the starfield like a glittering net. At the helm of the flagship Sovereigns will Asterisk, Xylas stood on the bridge, watching the swirling, violet mists of the rift grow larger on the view screen. The sensors were already screaming. The gravitational shear in this sector was immense, a constant buffeting that strained the inertial dampeners. And there, sitting on the edge of the volatility, was the human armada. It was not a fleet in the traditional sense. It was a wall. Huge, blocky shapes, devoid of aesthetic grace, hung in the void. They were massive, dwarfing the largest dreadnoughts of the Concordat. They were industrial monoliths, scarred by cosmic debris, bristling with antenna arrays and maneuvering thrusters the size of cities. They were not arranged in a battle formation. They were arranged in a lattice, a grid that seemed to be boxing in the rift itself. Between the massive ships, arcs of blinding white energy crackled, forming a containment field of staggering proportions. They were harvesting the very instability of the rift, siphoning the chaotic energies into batteries that defied scanning. "Hail them," Xylas ordered, his throat tight. "Wideband, all frequencies, this ends now." The communications officer, a multi-limbed Drogan, worked his console frantically. "Channel open, High Counselor, but I am getting significant interference. The energy output from their fleet is its equivalent to a small star. Put it through." Xylas stepped into the transmission circle. "Attention, H. Human fleet, this is High Counselor Xylas of the Galactic Concordat. You have entered restricted space. You have seized resources without treaty. You have ignored our borders and our laws. Your aggression ends here. Power down your vessels and submit to inspection, or we will be forced to engage." The response was not immediate. For a long moment, there was only the static hiss of the radiation washing over the hull. Then the view screen flickered and the static resolved into an image. It was a human. Not a warrior in power armor, nor a politician in robes. It was a figure clad in a utilitarian gray flight suit, seated in a chair that looked worn and comfortable. Behind him, a bustling bridge crew worked with quiet, terrifying intensity. The human was old, his face lined with the stress of hard decisions, his eyes dark and exhausted. He held a mug of steaming liquid in one hand, and he looked at the camera not with fear or anger, but with a profound, weary patience. This is Admiral Vance of the United Earth Engineering Corps, the human said, his voice gravelly and low. We received your hail, Counselor. We're a little busy right now. I strongly suggest you pull your fleet back. You're standing in the middle of a demolition zone. Xylas bristled, his mandibles clicking. Demolition zone? You are in sovereign space. You are stealing the energies of the rift. This is an act of war. Vance sighed, taking a sip from his mug. We aren't stealing anything, Counselor. And we aren't starting a war. We're fixing a leak. Now, I don't have time to explain the finer points of transdimensional structural integrity to you while I'm trying to keep a tear in reality from swallowing this entire sector. If you want to help, get your ships to divert power to our stabilization grid. If not, get out of the way, because if this line breaks, there won't be a Concordat to complain about it. Lies, Vorak shouted from the comms channel of his dreadnought. You take what you covet. You claim the rift for its power. The human admiral looked at Vorak's image on his own screen, his expression hardening. We take what we want. Is that what you think? Vance leaned forward, and for the first time, the sheer weight of his presence was felt across the light years. You think we want to be here? You think we want to spend generations in the dark, patching up the cracks in a universe that's falling apart at the seams? We don't want this. We take the asterisk burden because no one else can. We take the job nobody else is strong enough to do. Now look at your sensors. Look at the gravimetric readings coming from asterisk behind the rift. Xylas gestured to his science officer. Do as he says. Scan the depth of the rift. The officer's hands flew across the controls. The main display shifted, zooming past the human blockade, past the swirling violet mists, deep into the heart of the anomaly. The sensors stripped away the layers of interference, peering into the abyss. And then the bridge of the asterisk sovereign, S-will asterisk, went silent. There was something in the rift. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was a wound. A jagged, festering tear in the fabric of spacetime, bleeding darkness into the universe. And from that darkness, something was pushing through. Shapes. Writhing, impossible geometries that hurt the eyes to look at. They were vast tentacles of shadow that were clawing at the edges of the tear, trying to widen it, trying to get in. By the progenitors, Xylas whispered. What is that? That, Vance's voice cut through the horror, is what we call an entropy breach. It's the universe dying, Counselor. The fabric is wearing thin. We've been tracking these ruptures for 2 centuries. Every time one opens, we go there, we clamp it shut. We reinforce the local gravity well. We build a wall. You are not harvesting. Alara's voice came over the comms, trembling. You are stitching the wound. We're trying, Vance said, rubbing his eyes. But this one is big, bigger than we expected, and your arrival has complicated the local gravity metrics. Your mass is destabilizing our anchor points. The realization hit Xylas like a physical blow, the arrogance of the Concordat, the petty squabbles over borders and trade routes. While they had played at politics, humanity had been acting as the immune system of the galaxy, fighting a silent war against the very dissolution of reality. The taking that Vorak had despised, the stripping of planets, the seizure of resources, it was raw material. They were building dams to hold back a flood of non-existence. What do you need? Xylas asked, his voice steady now, stripped of all pride. Vance looked surprised. He studied the alien counselor for a moment, assessing. We need mass. We're trying to create a singularity anchor to pin the tier shut, but we're short on raw matter. We were breaking down the asteroids in the outer belt, but we're running out of time. The breach is widening. If it fully opens, the vacuum deck. I will propagate at the speed of light. Everything you know ceases to exist. Xylas looked at the tactical map. He looked at the grand fleet, thousands of ships, millions of tons of refined alloy antimatter cores and shield generators. He looked at Vorak's dreadnoughts built for war. He looked at the ornate pleasure yachts of the Sylphs, retrofitted with guns. We have mass, Xylas said. Vance narrowed his eyes. Counselor, you said you need mass to create an anchor. You need density. You need power. Xylas turned to the fleet channel. All ships, this is High Counselor Xylas. We have misunderstood the nature of the human presence. They are not invaders. They are the shield, and the shield is cracking. He took a deep breath. The human admiral states they need raw matter to seal the breach. Our weapons are useless here. Our diplomacy is useless here, but our ships are heavy. You cannot mean to, Vorak began, but he stopped. The warrior saw the shapes in the rift. He understood an enemy that could not be fought, only blocked. A warrior's death, Vorak grumbled, a strange note of approval in his voice. To die shielding the nest. Not all of us, Xylas corrected, but the reserves, the unmanned drones, the logistical haulers, and the older vessels. He looked at his own bridge. The Sovereign S-will asterisk was the pride of the fleet, but she was old. Her reactor was powerful, her hull thick. Admiral Vance, if we drive our ships into the accretion disk of your mechanism, can you use them? Vance's expression shifted from exhaustion to a profound respect. If you navigate them into the gravity well of our central processor, we can strip the matter and feed it into the singularity. It will give us the density we need. But those ships won't come back. They were built to protect the galaxy, Xylas said. Let them fulfill their purpose. The next hour was a chaotic ballet of sacrifice and engineering. The Concordat fleet broke formation. While the sleekest warships held the perimeter, the heavy cruisers, the supply barges, and the aging battleships moved forward. They moved toward the human blockade, toward the blinding light of the stabilization grid. Xylas watched as the pride of the Crawl Navy, the asterisk fist of iron asterisk, vented its crew into escape pods and accelerated toward the human machines. Guidance locked, Vance's voice came over the channel, sharp and professional now. Integrating alien mass signatures, commencing compression. The human ships, those blocky, ugly monoliths, began to shift. Immense mechanical arms unfolded, generating fields of magnetic force that grabbed the incoming Concordat vessels. It was a sight of terrifying industrial violence. The alien ships were crushed, compacted, and shredded in seconds, their matter stripped down to atomic slurry and funneled into the swirling vortex at the center of the human formation. The light grew blinding. The groan of gravity waves rippled through the hull of the asterisk sovereigns will asterisk. "It's not enough," Alara screamed over the comms. "The breach is pushing back. The shadows, they are adapting." On the view screen, the dark tendrils from the rift were lashing out, striking the human ships. A massive human cruiser, the Atlas Asterisk, was speared by a lance of pure darkness. The ship didn't explode, it simply withered, turning to gray dust and scattering into the void. "We're losing containment on the southern flank," Vance shouted, the comm finally cracking. "We need more power, we need to seal it now or never." Xylas gripped the podium. The Sovereign will Asterisk was the largest ship in the fleet. Its antimatter core was the most potent ever built by the Ethelgard. "Admiral," Xylas said quietly, "my ship. It has a core Type 9 reactor. If I detonate it within the singularity," Vance hesitated. "It would fuse the event horizon, it would weld the tier shut, but you'd have to be inside the gravity well to trigger it manually. The remote signals can't penetrate the interference." "I understand," Xylas said. He looked at his crew. They were looking back at him. There was fear, yes, but also a steely resolve. They were the high guard. They knew their duty. "Evacuate non-essential personnel. Navigation lay in a course for the center of the human grid." "Xylas," Vorek's voice roared. "You cannot, you are the High Counselor." "I am a servant of the Concordat," Xylas replied, "and today the Concordat stands with humanity." The Sovereign will Asterisk fired its main thrusters. It moved past the human blockade, a sleek, ornate dagger flying into the heart of a mechanical storm. As they passed the human flagship, Xylas saw the human crew standing at attention on their bridge. Admiral Vance offered a slow, sharp salute. Xylas returned the gesture with a bow of his head. The journey into the machine was a descent into madness. Gravity pulled at Xylas's shell, threatening to crack it. The view screen showed only blinding white light and the twisting, screaming darkness. Of the rift, shields failing, the tactical officer reported, his voice calm. "Hull integrity at 20%. Hold course," Xylas whispered, "just a little further." They were directly above the singularity now, a pinpoint of infinite density that the humans were trying to birth. The darkness lashed out, a claw of shadow raking across the hull, tearing through decks. "Initiate core overload," Xylas commanded. "Authorization Xylas 01. "Authorization accepted," the computer chimed. "Detonation in 3, 2. Humans take what they want," Xylas thought, a final moment of clarity amidst the chaos. "They take the pain, and now we share it." 1. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but the light was a new star being born. The Sovereign will Asterisk vanished, consumed by its own fire. The energy released was channeled by the human lattice, focused, compressed, and drove straight into the heart of the rift. The singularity ignited. The tier in space screamed. It was a psychic sound, felt by every living being in the sector. The shadows writhed and thrashed, but the anchor held. The new gravity well caught the edges of the wound and pulled them together with irresistible force. The violet mist swirled, compressed, and then with a final, thunderous snap that shook the sensors of the remaining fleet, the rift sealed. The darkness was gone. The white light faded. Silence returned to the Antares sector. On the bridge of the remaining Concordat ships, there was no cheering. Just a stunned, hollow awe. The human fleet was battered. 3 of their massive monoliths were gone. The rest were scarred, leaking atmosphere and plasma. Vance's face reappeared on the communication screens of the Allied fleet. He looked older than before. He wiped a smear of soot from his forehead. "This is Admiral Vance to the Concordat fleet," he said softly. "Target neutralized. The breach is sealed. Structural integrity of local space is stable at 99%. Vorak, the Crawl warlord, stared at the screen. You saved us all." Vance shook his head slowly. We did it together, your counselor. He was a brave soul. He understood the math. Why? Alara asked, her voice weeping. Why do you do this? Why do you scour the galaxy, taking on these horrors without asking for help, without telling us? Vance looked down at his console, then back up at the aliens who had accused him of conquest only hours ago. Because fear is a contagion, he said. If we told you that the universe is dying, that the fabric is wearing thin, panic would destroy civilization faster than the breaches ever could. We decided a long time ago that we would carry the knowledge, we would do the work, we would take the blame if it meant keeping the peace. He leaned back, the exhaustion radiating off him. You were right. Humans take what they want. We wanted a future, for our children, for yours. We took the responsibility because it was the only way to ensure there was a tomorrow to wake up to. The human fleet began to move. Engines flared, blue iron trails painting the dark. They were not turning to invade. They were not turning to occupy. They were forming up, preparing to jump. Where will you go? Vorak asked. There's another signal, Vance said, his eyes drifting to a readout that only he could see. Another stress fracture forming in the Perseus arm. We have to get there before it widens. Have to build another wall. Let us help, Vorak said, the offer hanging heavy in the air. The crawl, we are strong, we can build, we can fight. And the sylphs can listen, Alara added. We can help you find the cracks before they break. Vance paused. A faint smile touched his lips. It was the first time he had smiled. We're used to working alone. It's quieter, but... He looked at the space where the asterisk sovereign S will asterisk had been. I think the days of working alone are over. We're running out of mass and we're running out of time. If you want to come, try to keep up. The human ships engaged their drives. Space warped around them, not with the clean hum of Concordat engines, but with the brutal, tearing sound of brute force mastering physics. They vanished, jumping into the deep dark. But this time they did not leave silence behind. Vorak turned to his helm. Set coordinates to follow the human wake. Alert the High Synod. Tell them the war is over. Tell them the work has begun. The narrative of the galaxy had shifted. The mystery of the taking humans was solved. They were not the pirates of the void, they were its custodians. They were the weary janitors of a crumbling reality, sweeping back the dark with shovels made of starships and will. In the council chamber back on the homeworld, the hologram of the red zone was gone. In its place was a new data set, transmitted by Vance before he left. It was a map of the galaxy, but not political. It showed the fault lines of the universe. It showed the cracks. It showed how fragile her existence truly was. And standing over the map, the delegates were no longer squabbling children. They were silent, humbled by the revelation. They realized now that while they had been fighting over crumbs on the table, humans had been holding up the roof. The philosophical shift was immediate and profound. The accusation, humans take what they want, became a mantra, but its meaning had inverted. It became a prayer. Let them take the danger. Let them take the lead. Let them take us with them. Far out in the Perseus arm, the human fleet dropped out of warp. The sensors screamed again. Another tear. Another horror trying to push through the skin of the world. Admiral Vance looked at the screen, at the darkness bleeding in. He didn't flinch. He just keyed his mic. All hands prepare for deployment. Deploy the anchors. And keep a channel open for our new friends. I think they're bringing more bricks. The camera pulled back, away from the bridge, away from the fleet, zooming out until the ships were just sparks against the backdrop of a swirling nebula. The scale was immense, terrifying, and beautiful. The universe was breaking, yes, but for the first time in history it was being fixed. The humans had taken the job, and they weren't letting go. The cinematic sweep of the galaxy continued, moving past the Perseus arm, drifting through the ancient dust clouds where stars were born. The narrative voice, now disembodied and timeless, reflected on the nature of power. Most species believed power was the ability to force one's will upon others, to conquer, to own. But the humans had demonstrated a higher order of power, the power to endure, the power to suffer so that others did not have to. Deep in the archives of the Sylphian homeworld, a new chapter was being written in the Great Book of Skies. The scribe, a young scholar who had watched the Battle of Antares via the neural link, carefully etched the glyphs into the crystal tablet. The entry was titled The Stewards of Entropy Asterisk. It detailed the arrival of the gray ships, the misunderstanding of their silence, and the sacrifice of High Counselor Xylas. But the final passage was a meditation on the human spirit. We looked at them and saw greed, the scholar wrote. We saw their haste and called it arrogance. We saw their silence and called it disdain. But the universe is vast and cold and uncaring. It seeks to return to the nothingness from which it came. The natural state of the cosmos is decay. Civilization is an act of defiance against this decay. And the humans, they are the purest expression of this defiance. They do not build for glory, they build because the alternative is silence. They take the raw, chaotic matter of the stars and they force it to make sense. They impose order on a chaotic void. They take the weight of existence onto their shoulders, not because they are gods, but because they are stubborn. And in their stubbornness, they have given us a gift we did not earn: time. The scene shifted again years later. The Antares sector was no longer a forbidden zone. A memorial station had been built where the asterisk sovereign S-will asterisk had detonated. It was a joint project built by human engineers and Ethelgard architects. It was a beautiful thing, a spire of white stone and gray steel floating in the quiet vacuum. Ships passed it daily: Concordat trade vessels, human repair tenders, crawl patrol craft. They would dip their wings in respect as they passed. Inside the station, in the central observation deck, a statue stood. It depicted a human in a flight suit and an Ethelgard in ceremonial robes, standing back to back, holding up a fractured sphere. The plaque beneath it did not list casualties or victory statistics. It bore a simple inscription, a quote from the late Admiral Vance, recorded during the final moments of the sealing. "Gravity doesn't care about your politics. It only cares about your mass. Stand together or fall apart." The peace that followed was not a utopia. There were still disagreements. The Crawl still grumbled about trade tariffs, and the Sylphs still debated the ethics of terraforming. But the wars of conquest had ceased. The fleets were no longer pointed at each other. They were pointed outward toward the cracks. The great work had become the unifying religion of the galaxy. Every species contributed. The Crawl provided the muscle, the raw materials, mining the asteroid belts with a fervor they had once reserved for battle. The Sylphs provided the eyes, their sensitive instruments scanning the subspace frequencies for the telltale whistle of a coming breach. The Ethelgard provided the administration, the logistics, organizing the massive movements of resources required to feed the human machines. And the humans, they remained the architects. They were still strange, still aloof, still prone to working in silence. They terrified the younger races with their disregard for safety, their willingness to dive into gravity. Why wells that would crush a normal ship? But they were no longer feared as conquerors. They were revered as the frantic, brilliant, exhausted mechanics of the universe. The story moved to the edge of the galaxy, where the stars thinned out and the great dark began. Here, the largest project of all was underway: a wall. Not a metaphorical one, but a literal barrier of energy and matter stretching across the galactic rim. It was the big one that Vance had predicted. The entropy from the intergalactic void was pressing in, a tsunami of nothingness. A mixed crew worked on the scaffolding of a Dyson-class anchor. A human engineer, young and covered in grease, was arguing with a Drogan technician about coupling ratios. They were shouting, waving tools, frustrated by the complexity of the task. "It won't hold," the Drogan clicked. "The shear stress is too high. It has to hold," the human yelled back. "Reinforce the strut with the secondary field. Just need it to stick for 10 minutes while the core cycles." "You humans," the Drogan sighed, but he began welding the strut. "You always think you can cheat the math." "We don't cheat the math," the human grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. "We just make it work for us." Suddenly, the alarms blared, the void beyond the rim rippled. A breach was forming, not a small tear, but a rupture. Violet light spilled into the construction zone. "Clear the scaffolding," the human ordered, tapping his comms. "Control, we have a breach in Sector 7. Initiate lockdown." From the darkness, a ship emerged. It was not a construction tender, it was a warship, but it was ancient. The hull was pitted, the markings faded. It was a design not seen for 10,000 years. It was a precursor vessel, one of the ships of the progenitors, the mythical race that had drawn the borders and then vanished. The workers froze. The progenitors were gods in the eyes of the Concordat. To see one of their ships was a miracle. The vessel drifted closer, its weapons powered down. A transmission crackled over the open frequency. It was faint, archaic, speaking a dialect of Root Galactic that the translation matrix struggled to parse. "Guardians," the voice whispered. "We failed, we ran." The human engineer looked at his readings. "That ship is leaking antimatter. It's critical." "Identify yourselves," a calm voice cut in from the station command. It was a Sylph controller. "We are." "The first," the voice from the ancient ship replied. "We broke the world. We tore the fabric with our wars. We could not fix it. We fled to the void to escape the rot, but the rot followed." The revelation stunned the workers, the breaches, the entropy. It wasn't natural. It was a wound inflicted by the progenitors eons ago. They hadn't drawn the borders to keep order, they had drawn them to quarantine their mistakes, and they had left the younger races to die in the wreckage. Why return now? The Sylph asked. "Because we saw the light," the progenitor whispered. "We saw the stitches, we saw the walls. Who heals the world we broke?" The human engineer stepped forward to the viewport, looking at the massive, ancient, dying ship of the gods. He keyed his mic. "We do," the human said. "We're the cleanup crew." "You are strong," the progenitor said, all in the ancient voice. "We took everything from this galaxy. We took its future to fuel our engines. What do you take?" The human looked at the Drogon, then at the massive wall they were building, glowing against the dark. He thought of Xylas, he thought of Vance, he thought of the billions of lives safe behind the line. "We take the weight," the human said. The progenitor ship shuddered. "Then take us. We have little left, but our cores are strong. Use us to seal the dark." It was the final irony. The gods who had abandoned the galaxy returned not to rule, but to become mortar for the wall built by their children. The human engineer nodded. "Control, guide them in. Target the primary singularity. Let's put them to work." As the ancient ship moved toward the anchor, destined to become energy to save the future, the camera pulled back one last time. It soared over the rim of the galaxy, looking down at the spiral. It was no longer a collection of isolated territories. It was a fortress, a web of light and gravity, held together by the stubborn will of a species that refused to accept the end. The stars twinkled, not with the cold indifference of physics, but with the warmth of a hearth fire kept burning against the night. The humans had taken what they wanted. They had taken a dying, fractured galaxy and turned it into a home that would last forever. And in the silence of the void, if one listened closely, past the radiation static and the gravity waves, one could hear the hum of human engines, working, always working, ensuring that the anchor held.